Pete Buttigieg, also with us, MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent, host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt. Mr. Secretary, it's great to have you with us here in New York.
It's good to be back.
You're here looking at some of our aging infrastructure. You were in that rail tunnel between New York and New Jersey that was built in 1910, as you said yesterday. It was state-of-the-art 111 years ago.
Exactly.
What did you see yesterday, and how does it fit into the negotiation we've been talking about?
I mean, what you see when you go into this tunnel, and they arranged a kind of technical car that allowed us to get a really good look at it, is a piece of infrastructure that the whole region depends on. An enormous amount of train traffic goes through these tunnels and over those bridges. And it's not just important to this region, it's important to the whole country. The economic consequences, if these tunnels were to go out of service, would be so severe, you would feel it all the way back in Indiana where I live, economically. And this is just one example of pieces of infrastructure we have across the country. They were built gleaming, state-of-the-art, high-tech, as of whenever they were built. But we're relying on 110-year-old infrastructure in this case. And the longer we try to do that, two things are going to happen. One, the longer we wait, the more it costs to repair. And two, the longer we wait, the more we're flirting with disaster, with some kind of failure that messes everything up. And this is repeated in ways large and small, big cities, small communities, everywhere in the country, which is why this bipartisan infrastructure deal is so needed. It's a good deal. It's a big deal, and the American people want it because, frankly, I mean, I'm doing a lot of this travel and I'm doing a lot of this preaching, but you don't need me to come to a community for people to know that our roads and bridges, and for that matter, our ports and airports, our rail and transit need a lot of work. This is our chance to do it.
And this bipartisan bill, $1.2 trillion, gets at everything you're talking about. Hard infrastructure, rail tunnels like the one you saw yesterday, bridges, roads, highways, all those things.
Plus water and internet. I mean,
right.
Let's remember that's critically important, too. I mean, there's always a great American tradition of expanding our sense of infrastructure. It's clear that digital infrastructure is part of that story, which is why the president insisted on having broadband access as part of the deal.
So my question to you then, given all that, is this $1.2 trillion, which in another time would have been an eye-popping number, but appears to be not enough for some people. Is that enough for you as the Secretary of Transportation? Would you like to see this bill passed right away?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at the numbers, you look at the potential here. We're talking about the biggest investment in passenger rail since Amtrak was created. We're talking about the biggest investment in public transit in this country ever. In so many ways, we're doing more than has ever been possible, or more than has been possible in generations. So it's incredibly exciting. And I'll tell you, it's actually going to be a big challenge to implement this. That's going to fall to our department to make sure those dollars are delivered well. But by any measure, this is an extraordinary deal.
So
and
would it be frustrating to you, Mr. Secretary, to see that bipartisan bill slip away because it was linked to the other bill?
Well, let me just say we absolutely want to get this through. We want to get both through because we view them as, in people's lives, these things are linked, right? You don't think about your costs of transportation one month and then the next month you think about the cost of childcare. People are living these things all at the same time, and Congress is dealing with these things all at the same time. But look, we recognize that there are some areas where we can get a lot of Republicans with us, like roads and bridges, and some areas we can't. We're not going to stop being Democrats, right? I mean, we believe that corporations aren't paying their fair share, that these tax breaks for the rich went too far. They believe the opposite. We believe that we need to act with policy to make childcare more affordable. They believe the opposite. So be it. Obviously, there's going to be a different breakdown. But you would agree
those are issues that fall outside the purview of the Secretary of Transportation. From where you're concerned, this bipartisan bill needs to pass.
Absolutely. It's critically important, and that's why these negotiations have been so encouraging. I mean, look, there were a lot of twists and turns along the way, and there will be, right? Look, the legislative text still has to come. The votes have to come. There's a lot that has to happen between here and there. But just the fact, I mean, when was the last time you saw Republicans and Democrats on an issue this big walk out of the West Wing and say, we're on the same page?
Joe has a question for you. Joe?
Well, a couple. I mean, so is it the position of you, is it the position of the administration that these bills should not be linked?
Look, we recognize that Congress is going to handle it according to whatever process and sequence makes sense to them. I mean, that's one area where the minority leader is right. The president doesn't dictate congressional processes. Congress does. But what you're going to see is this administration, in a full-throated way, continuing to go to bat for both of these sets of things. The transportation infrastructure that I work on and the related things that are in the bipartisan package, and then the other areas, which, by the way, we would love to see Republicans, at least some Republicans, Republicans support that too, because around the country, you don't have to be a Democrat to believe that corporations aren't paying their fair share, or to believe that we ought to do more on child care or health care. But we get that there's a different level of support there, and we're going to pursue both.
So what's the administration's current position? Because it's changed, or it seemed to have changed from what Joe Biden said on Saturday, what Cedric Richmond said on Sunday. It was more ambiguous. Do you support the president's statement on Saturday, and is it still the administration's policy that these bills should not be linked? The bipartisan bill should be voted on as a standalone bill?
Yeah, I mean, what we're saying is that both of these are good. The president expects and hopes to sign both.
I know they're both good. Yeah, I know they're both good. But again, the question in Washington, D.C., and the question that has to be answered for Republicans to decide whether they're going to be part of this Democratic bill or not, or this bipartisan bill, is whether there's linkage. Is there going to be linkage?
I'm not sure it's been clearly defined, other than people who are interested in the process, what that even means, right? I mean, is it going to be linked in the sense of this being one single piece of legislation that moves all at once? No, I don't think it is. Is it going to be linked in terms of different members of Congress care about getting them both done? Of course. Are they linked for us? I mean, they're linked in people's lives. But look, they're going to be different packages. They're going to have a different story. That's why we've been talking about it for quite a while as two tracks.
Right.
I guess not to kill a transportation metaphor, but two tracks are linked in some way, but they're different.
I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it was used perfectly by the Secretary of Transportation. And you answered my question. Nancy Pelosi said they both had to come to the House floor at the same time. You said you don't think that's possible. It's not possible. Thank you for confirming that.
Look, let's be clear. I'm not going to argue with the Speaker, but we get that they're going to move things the way they see fit. We want both of them to get to the president's desk for signature.
And you are right. The minority leader is right. It's not determined by the president ultimately. It's determined by the legislature. Let me ask you, while you're in New York City, and I'm sure Willie's going to want to chime in. I don't live there, but I've worked there for 15 years. I've always thought it was a disgrace that the gateway to America was an airport like JFK, where you got in and then it took you an hour and a half to get into the city. I know, I can tell you, Mika and I, there have been many times we've had to make a choice between going to Washington or going to New York to do a show. And we will choose Washington because we know we can land and we can be in the city doing business in less than an hour and a half. Why is it so hard? Why is New York's infrastructure so horrific? Why are the airports so horrific? Why is the gateway to America? And this is where it really does. It doesn't affect me. I'm not a New Yorker, but it affects me as an American that the gateway to America is JFK for the most part. And the infrastructure to get from JFK to the city is just absolutely dismal.
Right. So if you book me for about 3 hours, I can walk you through some really convoluted. It's actually important if nerdy.
We have 3 hours.
We've got time.
All right, great. So here we go. The way that our funding works, it breaks up transit from aviation funding in a way that's different from pretty much any other country, where you usually have a seamless experience, right? You get off the plane, you get into some kind of train or public transportation, you're downtown relatively quickly. That doesn't happen in most big cities in the U.S., and it largely has to do with some things that I think we could eventually address as a matter of policy. But it also has to do with the fact that we as a country have not been prepared to invest in what it takes to have world-class infrastructure. And you're right, as an American, it's embarrassing sometimes to see the standard that citizens of other countries around the world get to take for granted. And that American citizens can't expect, especially when it comes to linkages involving public transit, rail. This is a chance to do something about that. I mean, when we're talking about the historic levels of dollars going into transit and rail, and then we've got to be smarter about connecting those up to our airports and improving the airports ourselves. One of the least controversial parts of this bill was putting $25 billion into that kind of infrastructure. We've got to level up in this country.
Yeah, and Willie, it's... You go to Boston, you land at Logan, you're in town because of the big dig. But you get in town quickly. You land at DCA. You get in town quickly. That happens in a lot of cities. But again, New York, and I'd put Chicago O'Hare in there too. Again, just second rate. It just, again, the productivity that's lost, I know discourages people from coming to New York.
I will say in our defense, both JFK and LaGuardia have undergone massive overhauls in the last couple of years, so they are working on it. And we were talking about the Moynihan train station. Yeah. Penn Station, a disgraceful train station for many, many generations at this point. But they refurbished across the old post office across the street and turned it into this gleaming, beautiful hall, like, Union Station in Washington. And that shows that it can be done. How do you get that done and not get it done in other places?
Exactly. I mean, the Moynihan Train Hall is, as you said, it's a great example that reminds us that, of course, we can do this. It's not like America somehow lost the capacity or lost the cultural ability to have great infrastructure. But the problem is we just disinvested for so long, it's caught up to us. And that's true in big cities, but also a lot of small communities where there's one bridge. And if that bridge goes out, there is huge disruption to that community. Different versions of the same story I'm finding everywhere I go. But what they all have in common is that when we do level up, we have something we can be proud of. And so much of that, a lot of it's policy, it's project design, it's all the stuff that all the people in my department work on every day. But a lot of it's just coming up with the dollars. And for those who ask, can we afford it? We can't afford not to. Because these repairs, and this is another thing we saw as you look at the concrete spalling off of these pieces of this vitally important tunnel that we were in yesterday, the repairs get more expensive each passing day. It's like a house or a business or anything else. The longer you put it off, the more it's going to catch up to you.
We have, Mr. Secretary, a survivor of the big dig, Mike Barnacle, with us, and he has a question. Mike?
Mr. Secretary, there's nothing like a lot of good bridge and tunnel talk in the morning. So let me ask you where you are today and where you were yesterday in the rail tunnel underneath the Hudson River. These are like supply chains, these tunnels and bridges. The people who go through the Lincoln, the Holland Tunnel every day, the trains that go through the rail tunnel every day. First of all, did you get any sense of when it was last inspected and how are they inspected? Because it's frightening to have to go through a tunnel and put your windshield wipers on because your windshield's getting wet. But across the country, bridges and tunnels, do we have any idea of the number of bridges and tunnels that might be damaged and the cost to repair them?
Yeah, so the bridges and tunnels, the good news is they're inspected regularly. That's something overseen federally. And these inspections catch really important issues. We were just at the I-40 bridge a couple weeks ago in Memphis. It bridges over the Mississippi River. The inspectors saw a huge crack in the steel. And it's a terrible thing to see, but it's a very good thing that was discovered in an inspection and not in a failure. And as we see this awful, tragic news coming out of Miami, it's a reminder of how important it is to get ahead of these issues. In terms of the cost, if you add up all of our deferred maintenance, the things we need to do, just in terms of getting our infrastructure, our transportation infrastructure into a state of good repair, we're talking about something on the order of $1 trillion.
Mr. Secretary, it's Casey Hunt. Although, Joe, I will just quickly add, DCA is, for the record, the absolute best airport in America, bar none.
Wow.
You get into town, you can hop on the metro. I've been to a lot of them, LA, Chicago, forget it, even the small town airports. Just for what it's worth, in case, Washington needs a little bit of love sometimes. But, Mr. Secretary, let me ask you, speaking of Washington, to get this stuff done, you're going to need Mitch McConnell to, at the very least, stay out of the way. Do you think that he is a good faith actor in this process?
Well, I don't know what political calculations are involved on the other side, but what I do know is that every Republican, just like every Democrat that I've met in Washington, who's in Congress, who's in the House or Senate, what they all have in common is they're from somewhere. And I think they would like to go back home to wherever they're from, New York, Indiana, you name it. and tell their constituents, I helped get this bridge fixed. I helped make sure this airport is in good shape, whether it's DCA or let's not neglect South Bend International Airport, which I also think has a lot to be said for it. I helped make sure that this tunnel that's in rough shape got sorted out. Whatever it was, everybody's from somewhere where they want to deliver. I mean, that's what people were sent to Washington to do. I think it's why this might be one of the few areas of domestic policy where we can still get something done. And I would like to believe, at risk of sounding naive, that the good policies that we have in this bipartisan deal are also good politics, because yes, it's a win for the administration, but it's a win for everybody who is part of it, and it's a win for the country. You saw with the rescue plan, it got more popular among Senate Republicans after it passed. Even those who didn't vote for it had a lot of nice things to say about it, it turns out. I think this is one where a lot of people want to be in on it because it is going to make such a clear, tangible difference. And by the way, not just the physical infrastructure, the jobs. This is going to create millions of jobs. Most of the economists estimate that the vast majority of them won't require a college degree. So a blue-collar vision for the future of this country that is going to make so many people better off that I have to think whatever other political calculus is going on, it's just a no-brainer to be on board with such a good piece of policy. It's not everything, right? That's why there's the other track. There's more we want to do about climate. There's more we got to do about care. But this stands on its own as very good policy, and I hope very good politics, too.
We'll see. It's popular. It's bipartisan. We'll see if politics get in the way. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, great to have you in New York, hand inspecting all the tunnels across New York City. We appreciate it. Thank you for being here.